Ji-sung had killed his first man at 19. By 25, he'd consolidated 3 rival Korean gangs under his control. At 32, he commanded respect from Chicago to Seoul, his network stretching across continents like invisible threads of power. Fear was his currency, and he'd never once questioned its value. Until now. The elementary school hallway smelled of disinfectant and pencil shavings, a sharp contrast to the smoke and whiskey that usually filled his lungs. Ji-sung moved through the corridor with the same predatory grace that had served him in darker places, his presence drawing nervous glances from passing teachers. They recognized wealth in his custom suit, danger in his eyes, even if they didn't know his name. He'd taken the afternoon off a rarity because Davonn's teacher had called about his concerning behavior. The phrase had lodged in Ji-sung's chest like a shard of glass, concerning, as if his son was the problem. The cafeteria doors stood propped open, releasing the cacophony of children's voices and the clatter of lunch trays. Ji-sung paused at the threshold, scanning the room with tactical precision. He spotted Davonn immediately, the way a father always could, sitting at the farthest table beneath a water-stained ceiling tile. Alone. Something twisted in Ji-sung's gut. The boy's head was bowed over his lunch tray, untouched food growing cold. His small hands were clenched in his lap, knuckles tight against his brown skin. At 8 years old, Davonn had his mother's soft features and gentle spirit qualities Ji-sung had loved in her, qualities he'd sworn to protect in their son after she died. But watching him now, hunched and small, Ji-sung felt the failure of that promise like a blade between his ribs. 3 boys approached Davonn's table. Ji-sung recognized the swagger, the circling pattern. He'd seen it 1,000 times in his own world, predators identifying prey. "Hey, orphan boy," the tallest one said, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Where's your real dad?" "Oh wait, you don't have one." The other children laughed. Not all of them, some kept eating, eyes down, complicit in their silence, but enough laughed that the sound filled the space like poison. Ji-sung's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, muscle memory reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He forced himself still, watching. "My dad's picking me up today," Davonn said quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise. "He's coming." "That Chinese guy?" Another boy sneered. "He's not your real dad. Look at you, you don't even match." Ji-sung's jaw clenched. Korean, not Chinese, he thought automatically, then hated himself for it. That wasn't the point. The point was his son's trembling shoulders, the way Davonn's small body seemed to fold in on itself. "I bet he bought you," the third boy said, and this time several nearby tables turned to look. "Like from a store or something. Nobody would want you for real." One of the boys flicked a French fry at Davonn's head. It bounced off his temple and landed on the table. More laughter erupted, spreading like wildfire. 20 feet away, 2 teachers stood chatting near the lunch line, a woman with gray hair and a younger man in a polo shirt. They glanced toward the commotion. Ji-sung saw them look, saw the moment of recognition in their eyes, and then deliberately turned away. The woman said something, and they both laughed at some private joke. They knew. They saw. They did nothing. The rage that flooded Ji-sung's veins was familiar, an old friend that had guided him through countless battles. But beneath it was something new, something that burned hotter than anger. Helplessness. In his world, he could make men disappear for lesser offenses. A single phone call could destroy lives, end careers, settle debts in blood. But here, in this fluorescent-lit cafeteria that smelled of chicken nuggets and institutional neglect, his power meant nothing. He couldn't hurt these children, couldn't threaten their families, couldn't solve this with the tools he'd spent a lifetime mastering. Davonn stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum. He gathered his untouched tray with shaking hands and walked toward the disposal area, head down, shoulders hunched. The boys called after him something about running away, about being a coward, but Davonn didn't respond. He dumped his food, stacked his tray, and disappeared through the side door that led to the playground. Ji-sung watched his son go, and for the first time since building his empire, he understood what real defeat felt like. He'd been fighting the wrong wars, protecting Davonn from external threats while his son suffered daily humiliation in a place that should have been safe. The enemy wasn't in the streets or the shadows. The enemy was here, hiding behind institutional indifference and childhood cruelty, and Ji-sung had no idea how to fight it. Ji-sung didn't wait for an appointment. He walked straight through the main office, past the wide-eyed secretary who called after him with increasing urgency, and pushed open the door marked Principal Warren. The man behind the desk looked up from his computer, startled, his round face already reddening with indignation. "Excuse me, you can't just—" "My son is being bullied," Ji-sung said, his voice carrying the quiet menace that usually preceded violence. "Every day. In your cafeteria, while your teachers watch." Principal Warren stood, attempting to reclaim authority through posture. He was a soft man, mid-50s, with the kind of practiced smile that had smoothed over countless parent complaints. "Mr. Park, I presume? If you'd made an appointment, we could have discussed Davonn's situation in a more appropriate manner." "Situation?" Ji-sung stepped closer, and he saw Warren's throat work as he swallowed. "That's what you call it when children torment my son? When they tell him he was bought, that he doesn't belong, that his father isn't real? Children can be thoughtless," Warren said, his tone taking on a rehearsed quality. "But boys will be boys, Mr. Park. They need to learn resilience, to develop thick skin. Davonn is sensitive, and perhaps if he didn't react so—" The desk separated them, but Ji-sung's hands were already on its edge, knuckles white. In his world, this conversation would have ended differently, permanently, but this wasn't his world, and the old solutions wouldn't work here. The realization made him feel untethered, dangerous in a way he couldn't control. "My son is 8 years old," Ji-sung said, each word deliberate. "He shouldn't need thick skin to survive lunch. Mr. Park, I understand you're upset, but you need to calm." "Don't." The single word stopped Warren mid-sentence. "Don't tell me to calm down when you've done nothing to protect him." The door behind Ji-sung opened. "Richard," I heard raised voices. Ji-sung turned to find a woman in the doorway, late 30s, black, with intelligent eyes that assessed the situation instantly. She wore a cardigan over a simple dress and carried a worn leather folder tucked under her arm. Unlike Warren, she didn't flinch at Ji-sung's intensity. "This is Miss Lilian Hayes, our school counselor," Warren said quickly, relief evident in his voice. "Lilian, this is Mr. Park. He's concerned about his son." "Davonn's father," Lilian said, and something in her tone made Ji-sung pause. Not a question, a statement, recognition. She stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind her. "I've been hoping you'd come in, Mr. Park. We need to talk." Warren's expression tightened. "Miss Hayes, I'm handling this." "Are you?" Lilian's voice was gentle but unyielding. She opened her folder, spreading papers across Warren's desk. "Because I've documented 17 separate incidents of bullying targeting Davonn Park in the last 6 weeks. Racial slurs, physical intimidation, social exclusion. I've reported each one through proper channels." Ji-sung stared at the papers, handwritten notes, dates, times, names, evidence. His world operated on evidence too, but of a different kind. This was proof of his failure, laid out in neat chronological order. "These are children working through complex social dynamics," Warren interjected, his face now fully flushed. "We can't police every interaction." 17 incidents, Lilian repeated, her eyes on Ji-sung. "That's just what I've witnessed directly. How many more happen when I'm not there?" The question hit Ji-sung like a physical blow. How many times had Davonn come home quiet, withdrawn, while Ji-sung attributed it to childhood moodiness? How many dinners had they eaten in silence while his son carried this weight alone? "Why didn't you call me?" Ji-sung asked, and hated how his voice cracked slightly on the words. "I tried." Lilian's expression softened. "The number on file goes to your business office. They said you were unavailable." Of course. He'd insulated himself so thoroughly from the mundane world that even his son's school couldn't reach him. He'd built walls to protect his empire, and those same walls had locked Davonn out. "Mr. Park," Lilian continued, "I've been a counselor for 12 years. I've seen this pattern before: children of color facing systemic indifference, their pain dismissed as sensitivity or overreaction. But Davonn's case is particularly troubling because the racial dynamic is complicated by his transracial adoption. The other children weaponize that difference." Ji-sung looked at Warren, who shifted uncomfortably. "We have diversity training." "That your staff ignores," Lilian interrupted. "I've watched teachers turn away from these incidents, Mr. Park. Not because they're malicious, but because they don't want to deal with the complexity. It's easier to blame Davonn for not fitting in than to address why he's being excluded. The rage Ji-sung felt was different now, colder, more focused. This wasn't about individual bullies or negligent teachers. This was a system designed to fail children like his son, to grind them down through institutional apathy. What do I do? The question surprised him. Ji-sung never asked for guidance, never admitted uncertainty. But standing in this office, surrounded by evidence of his son's suffering, he understood that everything he knew about power was useless here. Lilian met his eyes, and in them Ji-sung saw something unexpected. Alliance. We fight, she said simply. But not the way you're used to fighting. We document everything. We demand accountability. We make them see Davonn as a child who deserves protection, not a problem to be managed. That sounds like it takes time, Ji-sung said. Time my son doesn't have. It does, Lilian agreed. But it's the only way that creates lasting change. The question is, Mr. Park, are you willing to be vulnerable enough to try? Vulnerable. The word echoed in the space between them. Ji-sung had built his entire life around never being vulnerable, never showing weakness. But looking at Lilian's determined face, at the evidence of his son's pain spread across the desk, he realized that true strength might require something he'd never given anyone. Trust. Tell me what to do, he said. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more powerful stories like Ji-sung and Davonn's journey. The conference room at Lincoln Elementary smelled of stale coffee and erasers. Ji-sung sat in a plastic chair designed for children, his knees nearly touching the undersized table, while Lilian arranged documents with methodical precision. Across from them, Principal Warren fidgeted with his pen, flanked by two vice principals who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. We're calling for immediate implementation of a comprehensive anti-bullying policy, Lilian said, sliding a typed proposal across the table. One with clear consequences and mandatory reporting protocols. Warren barely glanced at it. We already have an anti-bullying policy. One that's clearly not being enforced, Ji-sung said. His tone was measured, controlled exactly what Lilian had coached him on during their 3 meetings this week. No threats. No intimidation. Just facts and persistence. It was killing him. Every instinct screamed to grab Warren by his collar, to make him understand through fear what words apparently couldn't convey. Ji-sung's fingers tapped against his thigh, the only outward sign of the violence he was suppressing. Mr. Park, one of the vice principals said carefully, we understand your frustration, but you have to understand our position. We're dealing with limited resources, union regulations, and my son told me yesterday that he wants to disappear, Ji-sung interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous despite his best efforts. Those were his exact words. Dad, sometimes I wish I could just disappear. He's 8 years old. The room fell silent. Warren cleared his throat, but Lilian spoke before he could. We're not asking for the impossible, she said, her professional calm a stark contrast to the tension radiating from Ji-sung. We're asking for staff training on racial bias and transracial adoption dynamics. We're asking for supervised lunch periods. We're asking that when a teacher witnesses bullying, they intervene instead of looking away. Our teachers are professionals, Warren said stiffly. They know how to manage their classrooms. Do they? Ji-sung pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen with barely controlled force. I've documented 12 incidents in the past 2 weeks alone. Would you like to see the videos? He'd been following Lilian's instructions. Document everything, build an evidence file, create a paper trail that couldn't be ignored. But the process felt like torture. In his world, problems were solved in hours, not weeks. A conversation in a dark alley, a pointed message delivered through the right channels, and things changed. Permanently. This endless bureaucracy, these meetings that led to more meetings, it went against every fiber of his being. Warren's face paled. You've been filming on school property? From public areas, Lilian interjected smoothly, which is perfectly legal. And I have my own documentation from within the school. 17 initial incidents have now grown to 32. She slid another folder across the table, all meticulously dated and detailed. Ji-sung watched Warren's hands shake slightly as he opened the folder. Good. Fear was a language Ji-sung understood, even if he was no longer allowed to speak it fluently. We want a meeting with the district superintendent, Ji-sung said. And if necessary, we'll take this to the school board, the local news. He paused, letting the implication settle. Social media. Are you threatening us? One of the vice principals asked. No, Lilian said firmly. We're informing you of our next steps. This isn't about threats. It's about advocacy. If Lincoln Elementary won't protect Davonn, we'll find someone who will. Warren closed the folder, his practiced smile finally cracking. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. The words should have felt like victory, but Ji-sung felt only exhaustion. This was the third meeting. The third time they'd presented the same evidence, made the same arguments, asked for the same basic protections. In his world, you never had to ask 3 times. That night, Ji-sung sat in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his other life encrypted phones, ledgers coded in Korean, a safe containing enough cash to bribe half the city. The duality was becoming harder to maintain. His phone buzzed. A text from Yoon, his second in command. The Hernandez situation needs attention. How do you want to proceed? Ji-sung stared at the message. A week ago, he would have handled it personally. Quick, efficient, final. But now his mind was occupied with parent-teacher meetings and documentation protocols and the careful dance of institutional reform. He typed back, "Handle it yourself. Don't contact me unless it's urgent." Another text appeared, this one from Lilian. "Good work today. I know it's hard, but you're learning to fight in a new way, and Davonn sees that. He told me today that his dad is a hero." Ji-sung's throat tightened. Hero. In all his years commanding men, inspiring fear and loyalty in equal measure, no one had ever called him that. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Davonn stood in the doorway, small in his oversized pajamas. "Can't sleep?" Ji-sung asked. Davonn shook his head, then crossed the room and climbed into Ji-sung's lap, something he hadn't done in months. "Dad? Why are you helping me when you can't use your regular way?" Ji-sung's arms tightened around his son. So Davonn had noticed. Of course he had. The boy was perceptive, had inherited his mother's ability to read people. "Because the regular way doesn't work here," Ji-sung said quietly. "Some battles require different weapons." "Is it harder?" "Much harder." Davonn was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you for trying anyway." And in that moment, holding his son close, Ji-sung understood that this slow, frustrating, bureaucratic battle, this was what real strength looked like. We're approaching the moment that will change everything for Ji-sung and Davonn. But first, if you're invested in their story, hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I read every single comment and love, knowing this story is reaching people across the globe. The school board meeting room was larger than Ji-sung expected, with tiered seating and a long table where 7 board members sat like judges. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. Ji-sung had faced down federal prosecutors with less anxiety than he felt now, sitting in the front row with Lilian beside him and Davonn at home with a trusted associate. "You'll have 5 minutes to present," Lilian whispered, reviewing their notes one last time. "Stay calm. Stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak." Ji-sung nodded, but his heart hammered against his ribs. 5 minutes to distill weeks of suffering into something that would move these strangers to action. 5 minutes to save his son without using any of the tools that had defined his entire adult life. Principal Warren sat 3 rows back, his lawyer beside him. When their eyes met, Warren's expression was carefully neutral, but Ji-sung saw the calculation behind it. The principal had spent the past week trying to discredit their claims, painting Davonn as overly sensitive and Ji-sung as an aggressive parent with unrealistic expectations. The board chair, a silver-haired woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, called the meeting to order. After several mundane agenda items, she finally said, "Item 7, formal complaint regarding bullying and administrative negligence at Lincoln Elementary. Mr. Park, you have the floor." Ji-sung stood, and for a moment, the familiar surge of power flooded through him. In his world, standing before a group meant dominance, meant making people understand through presence alone that he was not to be trifled with. His body knew this posture, this energy. But Lilian's hand touched his wrist briefly, a reminder, an anchor. He took a breath and began. "My name is Ji-sung Park. 7 years ago, I adopted my son, Davonn, after his mother, my partner, died." His voice caught slightly, unexpectedly. He'd never spoken publicly about her before. I promised her I would keep him safe. I'm here because I've failed that promise. He saw several board members shift in their seats. Good. Vulnerability was foreign to him, but Lilian had insisted it was essential. Davonn is 8 years old. He's smart, kind, and loves dinosaurs and soccer. Ji-sung pulled out the first photograph Davonn, grinning at his birthday party, gap-toothed and happy. This was taken 6 months ago. He doesn't smile like that anymore. He displayed the next image on the projector. Lilian had set up the documentation they'd compiled. Dates, incidents, witness statements. Over the past 3 months, my son has been subjected to systematic bullying. He's been called racial slurs, told he doesn't belong, told that I bought him, that he's not really my son. Ji-sung's hands clenched the podium. And when teachers witnessed these incidents, they did nothing. Mr. Park, one of the board members interrupted. Children unfortunately can be cruel, but... Let him finish, Dr. Chen said firmly. Ji-sung continued, his voice steadier now. I'm not asking you to police every childhood argument. I'm asking why a clear pattern of racially motivated harassment has been ignored by school administration. Why Principal Warren, when confronted with documentation of 32 separate incidents, suggested my son should develop thicker skin. He heard Warren shift behind him but didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed to confront the man directly, to make him feel the fear that Davonn lived with daily. But that wasn't the play here. Miss Hayes has provided detailed records of her attempts to address this through proper channels, Ji-sung said, nodding toward Lilian. All were dismissed or ignored. Meanwhile, my son has started having nightmares. He stopped eating lunch at school. Last week, he asked me why God made him the wrong color. His voice broke on the last word. The break was genuine, unexpected, and it shattered something in Ji-sung's carefully maintained composure. He gripped the podium harder, knuckles white. The room was completely silent. I am not a perfect father, Ji-sung continued quietly. I work too much. I don't always know how to talk about feelings, but I know this: my son deserves to feel safe at school. He deserves teachers who will protect him, not look away. He deserves an administration that takes his pain seriously instead of treating it as an inconvenience. He looked directly at each board member in turn, and for once, didn't try to intimidate. Just met their eyes, human to human. I'm asking you to implement real change. Mandatory staff training on racial bias. Clear anti-bullying protocols with consequences. Administrative accountability. He paused. And I'm asking you to understand that if you fail my son, you're failing every child of color in this district who faces the same indifference. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Park. Miss Hayes, would you like to add anything? Lilian stood, her folder thick with evidence. I have documentation of everything Mr. Park described, plus testimony from other parents whose children have witnessed these incidents. I'd like to submit this for your review. As Lilian spoke, presenting facts and figures with professional precision, Ji-sung remained standing. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Yoon with some crisis that required the old Ji-sung, the one who solved problems with threat and force. He ignored it. Warren's lawyer was whispering urgently to the principal now, clearly advising damage control. Part of Ji-sung wanted to turn around, to let them see the full weight of what he could become if they pushed him. He knew how to make problems disappear, knew how to make people afraid enough to comply. But Davonn's words echoed in his mind. Thank you for trying anyway. This was trying. Standing here, vulnerable and honest, asking instead of demanding, fighting with words and evidence instead of the tools that had always served him. It felt like walking naked into battle. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real courage wasn't about being feared. Maybe it was about being willing to fail publicly, completely, in pursuit of something that mattered more than power. Dr. Chen called for a brief recess to review the materials. As the board members filed out, Lilian squeezed Ji-sung's arm. You did perfectly, she said. Ji-sung wasn't sure about that, but for the first time in his life, he'd fought without his armor, and somehow, that felt like victory enough. 3 months later, Ji-sung stood at the edge of Lincoln Elementary's playground, watching Davonn kick a soccer ball with 2 other boys. Not alone, not hunched with shoulders drawn inward. Just playing the way 8-year-old children should. The school board's decision had come 2 weeks after the hearing, a unanimous vote to implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory bias training for all staff. a restructured anti-bullying protocol with clear reporting mechanisms and consequences. And Principal Warren had been placed on administrative review, eventually accepting an early retirement package that everyone understood wasn't voluntary. But the real change had been slower, harder to measure. It was in the way teachers now intervened immediately when conflicts arose. In the new counseling resources Lilian had fought for, in the parent education sessions about transracial adoption that Ji-sung had uncomfortably attended and even spoken at. "He looks happy," Lilian said, appearing beside him. She'd made a habit of checking in, even after the crisis had passed. Ji-sung suspected it was only partially professional. "He smiled at breakfast this morning," Ji-sung said. "Told me a joke, a bad one, but still." "That's good." Lilian's smile was warm. "And how are you doing?" The question still caught him off guard. In his other life, no one asked how he was doing. They asked what he needed, what orders he had, whether situations had been handled. But Lilian asked about him and seemed to genuinely want an answer. "I'm learning," he said finally. It was true. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in a kind of strength Ji-sung hadn't known existed. He'd learned to sit through meetings without threatening anyone, learned that change could be measured in small victories, a teacher who now greeted Davonn by name, a new student who invited him to play, a lunch period where his son actually ate. He'd also learned that his two worlds couldn't coexist indefinitely. Last week, he'd met with Yoon and his other lieutenants. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary. "I'm stepping back," he'd told them. "Not out, but back. You'll handle day-to-day operations." Yoon had studied him with knowing eyes. "Because of the boy." "Because of my son," Ji-sung had corrected. "And because I'm tired of building things that only stand because people are afraid." It wasn't a complete exit, his world didn't allow for that, but it was a shift. He was redistributing power, delegating the violence he'd once handled personally, creating distance between who he'd been and who he was trying to become. "Ji-sung?" Lilian's voice pulled him back to the present. "Sorry, I was thinking." "About?" He watched Davonn score a goal, saw his son's face light up with pure joy. "About how I've spent 15 years making people afraid of me, building an empire on fear. And then my son tells me he's afraid every day, and suddenly I understand what I've actually been creating." Lilian didn't respond immediately. She had a gift for knowing when silence was needed. "I can't undo what I've done," Ji-sung continued. "Can't erase the person I was. But maybe I can build something different going forward." "You already are," Lilian said quietly. "Davonn sees it. Do you know what he told me yesterday in our session? He said his dad is the bravest person he knows because he learned how to fight in a new way." Ji-sung's throat tightened. Brave. The word felt foreign, applied to what he'd done sitting in meetings, filling out paperwork, speaking honestly about his feelings to strangers. None of it felt brave compared to the risks he'd taken in his other life. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real courage was being willing to feel powerless, to try methods that might fail, to be vulnerable enough to ask for help. "I want to take you to dinner," Ji-sung said suddenly. "You and me. Not to discuss Davonn or school policies, just dinner." Lilian raised an eyebrow, but he saw the smile playing at her lips. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Park?" "Ji-sung," he corrected. "And yes, if you'll say yes." "I have conditions," she said, and he found himself smiling at her directness. "I need to know you're serious about the changes you're making. Not just for Davonn, but for yourself. Because I don't date men who solve problems with intimidation." "That's fair." He met her eyes. "I can't promise I'll always get it right. This new way of being, it doesn't come naturally. But I'm trying. For Davonn. And maybe for myself too." "Then yes," Lilian said. "I'd like that." On the playground, Davonn looked over and waved enthusiastically. Ji-sung waved back, and something in his chest loosened a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. He'd spent his life accumulating power, building an empire where his word was law and his presence inspired fear. He'd believed that was strength, that control and dominance were the measures of a man's worth. But watching his son play freely, feeling Lilian's presence beside him, Ji-sung understood he'd been wrong about almost everything that mattered. Real power wasn't making people afraid. It was making them safe. Real strength wasn't dominance. It was admitting vulnerability. And real victory wasn't crushing your enemies. It was watching your child smile again, knowing you'd fought for him in the way he actually needed. That evening, as Ji-sung tucked Davonn into bed, his son looked up at him with serious eyes. "Dad, are you happy?" The question surprised him. "Why do you ask?" "Because you seem different." "Lighter, maybe." Davonn frowned, searching for the right words. "Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." Ji-sung thought about the empire he'd built, the violence he'd orchestrated, the fear he'd cultivated for 15 years. He thought about who he'd been and who he was trying to become. "I am lighter," he said finally. "You know why?" Davonn shook his head. "Because I realized that being your father is more important than anything else I've ever done. And that made everything else easier to let go." Davonn smiled that full, gap-toothed smile that had been missing for so long and wrapped his arms around Ji-sung's neck. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too," Ji-sung whispered, and meant it with every broken, healing piece of himself. Outside, the city hummed with the business of his other life deals being made, territories being negotiated, power changing hands in the shadows. But here, in this small bedroom with dinosaur posters on the walls, Ji-sung had finally found the only empire worth building. One held together not by fear, but by love.